He never saw his maid until she wore that black dress, and by the time he did, it was already too late to save her. Sterling Kane had been blind to Willow Reed for 8 months, never noticing the woman who cleaned his floors was connected to his father's darkest secret. A warehouse conversation 5 years ago where she accidentally became the only witness to a mob boss's final threat. Now the Castellanos have her brother tied to a chair in that same warehouse, and Sterling has 1 hour to decide: trade his life for hers, or watch them both die. But to understand why Sterling would die for a woman he never noticed, you need to see what she'd been hiding. Sterling Kane did not wait for staff, but that night he sat motionless in the darkened study of his estate, still wearing his suit jacket from the evening's meeting, his Glock resting within arm's reach on the mahogany desk. The house had emptied hours ago. His security team had retired to their quarters. The negotiations with the Castellano family could resume tomorrow, but this couldn't wait. Willow Reed, his maid, the woman who had worked in his home for 8 months and somehow remained completely invisible to him, always moving through rooms like a shadow in her gray uniform, hair pulled back severely, eyes carefully avoiding his, voice barely above a whisper when she spoke at all. She cleaned, she organized, she vanished into the walls of the mansion as if she were part of the architecture itself until tonight. He hadn't intended to leave his office. He hadn't intended to walk toward the service entrance. But he did because something caught his peripheral vision that made his breath stop in his chest. A woman. A strikingly beautiful woman. Not the ghost who dusted his bookshelves. Not the silent figure who straightened his newspapers and disappeared before he could acknowledge her presence. A woman in a fitted black dress that hugged curves he hadn't known existed. Hair falling in soft waves past her shoulders. Lips colored with something dark and inviting. Heels that made a confident rhythm against the marble floor. She stood near the staff exit, checking her reflection in the antique mirror by the door, adjusting a delicate silver bracelet on her wrist. Her posture was different, relaxed, alive. Nothing like the tense invisibility she wore like armor in his presence. It took Sterling 4 full seconds to realize who he was looking at. Willow. He stood frozen in the hallway's shadows. She turned slightly, catching sight of him in the mirror's reflection, and her entire body tensed, as if bracing for punishment. But he said nothing. He couldn't. His chest constricted in a way that felt dangerously close to panic. His pulse hammered and rage mixed with something far more unsettling, something he refused to name. "Where are you going?" The words came out lower, rougher than he intended. She swallowed hard. Out. With who? Friends. The answer sent fire through his veins. He hated the dress. Hated that he'd never seen this version of her. Hated that she'd been hiding it from him. Hated that it mattered. When she moved past him toward the door, a trace of perfume, something floral and unexpected, replaced the usual scent of lemon cleaner and furniture polish he associated with her. She didn't look back. The door closed softly behind her, and her footsteps faded into the night. Sterling pulled out his phone and sent a brief message to 2 of his most discreet men with a single instruction and no explanation. And now, hours later, he sat rigid in the darkness, jaw locked, eyes fixed on the entrance, waiting for her return. The clock read 3:07 a.m. when he heard movement outside. A key turned carefully in the lock. Willow slipped inside, easing the door closed with the practiced quiet of someone who believed the household was asleep. She took 3 steps into the hallway before she saw him and stopped dead. Her eyes widened in shock. "Mr. Kane, I didn't realize you were up this late." He cut her off, leaning forward in his chair. "You said friends. That usually ends before 3 in the morning." Willow straightened her spine. "I'm off duty. What I do after hours isn't your concern." He rose from his seat. His height forced her to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. It was the closest they had ever stood to each other. Her makeup was slightly smudged from hours of whatever she'd been doing. Her hair was windswept from the night air. Her cheeks were flushed with color. She looked more alive than he'd ever seen her. It made the anger sharper. "You came back alone," he said, his voice tight. "Yes. You shouldn't be walking alone in this city at 3 in the morning." She frowned. "I've been doing it for years." "Not anymore." Her arms crossed defensively. "Why?" He didn't have an answer that wouldn't expose too much. "Because you looked like someone else tonight. Because every man in that club watched you too closely, according to my men. Because I didn't know you could look like that, and now I can't stop seeing it." He settled for control instead of truth. "You work in this house. That makes your safety my responsibility." She shook her head, frustration flashing across her features. "This is control, not concern." He stepped closer, invading her space. "Call it whatever helps you sleep. Just don't come home this late again." Her breath hitched, not from fear but from surprise, as if she hadn't expected him to sound territorial. Territorial. The word fit too well. The feeling burned like acid. "Good night, Mr. Kane," she whispered, moving around him and heading toward the staff quarters. He didn't sleep. Not for a single second. He kept replaying the images his men had sent him throughout the night. Willow laughing with a group at a high-end nightclub. Willow dancing with easy confidence. Willow glowing in ways she never did within these walls. He resented every moment of it. By morning, Sterling was seated at the breakfast table, coffee untouched, eyes locked on the doorway. He didn't understand why he felt restless. He didn't understand why the sight of her in that dress had affected him so viscerally. But he knew something fundamental had shifted between them. Footsteps approached. Willow entered, not in her uniform, but in dark jeans, a fitted sweater, light makeup, and a leather jacket draped over her arm. Again. His jaw tightened automatically. "Going somewhere?" He didn't hide the edge in his voice. She nodded. "Yes." "It's my day off." "Dressed like that?" Her eyebrows lifted. "What exactly is wrong with how I'm dressed?" He didn't answer, because the truth was too simple and far too dangerous to admit aloud. Nothing was wrong with how she looked, and that was precisely the problem. He thought he was protecting her. He didn't know he was marking her for death. The clock on Sterling's desk read 3:07 a.m. when he heard the soft scrape of a key in the front lock. He'd been sitting in the study for over 4 hours, jacket still on, tie loosened, the Glock within easy reach though he had no intention of using it. Not tonight. Not on her. The house was silent except for the distant hum of the security system and the faint click of Willow's heels on the marble entryway. She was trying to be quiet, careful, as if she could slip back into her room unnoticed like she'd done 100 times before. But tonight was different. Tonight, he'd been waiting. He heard her pause in the hallway, probably removing her shoes. The soft rustling of fabric. Then footsteps, lighter now, padding toward the staff quarters. Sterling rose from his chair and moved into the doorway of the study, positioning himself directly in her path. She rounded the corner and stopped dead, her breath catching audibly when she saw him standing there in the shadows. For a moment, neither of them moved. She was still wearing the black dress, though now it looked slightly rumpled from hours of whatever she'd been doing. Her hair, which had been perfectly styled when she left, now fell in messy waves around her face. Her makeup was smudged at the corners of her eyes. She looked exhausted and beautiful and nothing like the woman who scrubbed his floors every morning. "Mr. Kane." Her voice was steady, but he caught the tremor underneath. "I didn't expect anyone to be awake." He stepped forward into the dim light filtering through the windows. "Where were you?" Willow's chin lifted slightly, That familiar defensive posture he'd seen countless times when his head of security questioned the staff about minor infractions. Out, like I said earlier. Out where? That's personal. Sterling moved closer, close enough that he could smell the faint trace of cigarette smoke clinging to her dress, mixed with perfume and something else he couldn't identify. Alcohol, maybe. The scent of other people. You work in my home. You live under my roof. That makes your whereabouts my business. Her eyes flashed with something he'd never seen before. Anger. Real anger. Not the careful blankness she usually wore around him. I work for you, Mr. Kane. I don't belong to you. There's a difference. The words hit harder than they should have. He felt his jaw tighten, felt the familiar cold control he relied on in negotiations start to slip. You came back alone. Yes. At 3 a.m. Yes. Through streets that aren't safe at this hour. Willow crossed her arms, the gesture pushing up the neckline of her dress slightly. I've been taking care of myself for a long time. I don't need you to suddenly start worrying about it now. I'm not worried. The lie tasted bitter. I'm stating a fact. This city has risks. Risks that increase exponentially after midnight. Especially for women walking alone. I appreciate your concern, she said, though her tone suggested the opposite. But I've been managing just fine. Sterling took another step forward, closing the distance between them until she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. This close, he could see the flutter of her pulse at the base of her throat, could see the way her breathing had quickened despite her attempt to appear calm. Things change, he said quietly. As of tonight, you don't go out alone after 10 p.m. If you need to be somewhere, you tell me in advance, and I'll arrange transportation. Her mouth fell open slightly in disbelief. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. You have no right. I have every right. He cut her off, his voice dropping to something darker, more dangerous. You live in a house that's under constant surveillance because of the work I do, the people I associate with, the enemies I've made. That makes you a potential target, whether you like it or not. Willow's expression shifted from anger to something more complicated, a mix of frustration and reluctant understanding. I've been working here for 8 months. This has never been an issue before. That was before. Before what? Before he'd seen her in that dress? Before he'd realized she was more than the invisible ghost who moved through his home? Before he'd watched security footage of her laughing with strangers in a club where anyone could have been watching? He couldn't say any of that. Security protocols change, he said instead. Consider this an update. She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her mind working, calculating, trying to find an angle to push back. Finally, she said, "What if I refuse?" The question hung in the air between them. Sterling had dozens of responses available. Legal threats about her employment contract, reminders about the generous salary she received, veiled warnings about how difficult it would be to find equivalent work elsewhere. But instead, he found himself saying something else entirely. Then I'll follow you myself. Her eyes widened. That's insane. That's reality. He leaned in slightly, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her skin. You can call it control. You can call it overreach. You can call it whatever helps you sleep at night. But you will follow these rules, Willow, because I will not watch you put yourself in danger. Not anymore. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. For the first time since he'd known her, she seemed at a loss for words. The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged with something neither of them wanted to name. Finally, Willow took a small step back, breaking the magnetic pull of proximity. Is that all, Mr. Kane? Her voice was quiet now, stripped of its earlier defiance. He wanted to say no. He wanted to demand answers about where she'd been, who she'd been with, why she'd hidden this version of herself for so long. But instead, he simply said, "For now." She nodded once, then moved past him toward the staff quarters, her footsteps silent on the carpet. Sterling stood motionless in the hallway long after she'd disappeared, his hands clenched at his sides, fighting the urge to follow her, to push harder, to demand the control he could feel slipping through his fingers like water. The house settled back into silence around him, but something had fundamentally changed, and they both knew there was no going back. What Sterling didn't know was that Willow was hiding more than just a black dress. Sterling found her in the kitchen the next evening, still in her gray uniform but with her hair down, pulling on the same leather jacket she'd worn that morning. It was 6:30, earlier than her usual departure time when she went out. He'd spent the entire day in meetings he couldn't focus on, his mind circling back to the confrontation in the hallway, to the way she'd looked at him with equal parts anger and something else he couldn't identify. Now, watching her check her phone and grab her keys from the counter, he felt that same irrational surge of possessiveness rise in his chest. "Where are you going?" His voice cut through the quiet kitchen. Willow jumped slightly, her hand going to her chest. "God, you have to stop doing that. Answer the question." She turned to face him fully, and he saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the kind that came from too little sleep and too much stress. "I'm going to work." "You work here." "I work here during the day," she corrected, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "At night, I work somewhere else." The words hit him like a physical blow. "What?" "I have a second job," Willow said, her tone matter-of-fact, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. "Have had it for the past 3 months. I work Thursday through Sunday nights at a club downtown." Sterling felt his control slipping again. Felt that dangerous heat rising in his chest. "What kind of club?" "The kind that serves drinks." Her eyes narrowed. "I'm a bartender, Mr. Kane. Nothing more." He moved closer, blocking her path to the door. "You're telling me you've been working at a nightclub 4 nights a week and you never thought to mention it?" "Why would I? What I do on my own time has nothing to do with you." "Everything you do has to do with me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Especially when it involves putting yourself in environments that..." "That what?" she interrupted. "That you don't approve of? That you can't control?" She stepped forward, challenging him. "I don't need your permission to work, Mr. Kane. I need the money, so I work. It's that simple." The money. Of course it was about money. He should have seen it sooner. Should have realized that the salary he paid her, generous though it was for domestic staff, clearly wasn't enough. "How much do you need?" Willow blinked. "Excuse me? How much money do you need to quit this second job?" He pulled out his phone, already opening his banking app. "I'll double your salary, triple it if necessary, but you're not going back to that club." For a moment, she just stared at him in disbelief. Then she laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that made his jaw tighten. "You think you can just throw money at this? Just buy your way out of me having a life outside these walls?" "That's not what I'm doing." "That's exactly what you're doing," she shot back. "And I'm not interested." She tried to move past him, but he caught her arm, his grip firm but not painful. "Willow, listen to me. Nightclubs are dangerous. The people who frequent them, the situations that can arise. I've been handling it just fine for 3 months. That was before I knew about it. Now that I do, I can't let you..." She jerked her arm free, her eyes blazing. "You can't let me? Who do you think you are? You're not my father, you're not my boyfriend. You're my employer. And what I do when I'm not employed by you is none of your damn business." The word boyfriend hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them wanted to examine. Sterling felt something dark and possessive coil tighter in his chest. "Give me the address." "No." "Willow." "No," she repeated, moving around him toward the door. "I'm already late. This conversation is over." He watched her leave, watched the door close behind her with more force than necessary, and felt his control finally snap. He pulled out his phone and dialed Marcus, his head of security. "Sir?" Marcus answered on the first ring. "Find out where Willow Reed is working. I want the name and address of the club in the next 10 minutes. Sterling was about to discover he wasn't the only one watching Willow. 20 minutes later, Sterling was in the back of his SUV, Marcus driving, heading toward the east side of the city where the clubs clustered like jewels in the dark. Marcus had been efficient as always. The club was called Echo, a mid-tier establishment that catered to young professionals and college students. Not the worst place she could have chosen, but far from the safest. "Sir, are you sure about this?" Marcus asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "She's going to know you followed her." "I'm aware. It might not be well received. I don't care." And he didn't. Whatever anger she directed at him would be preferable to sitting at home wondering what was happening, wondering who was talking to her, looking at her, touching her. The thought made his hands curl into fists. The club's exterior was understated, a black facade with minimal signage, the kind of place that relied on word of mouth rather than flashy advertising. A line of people waited behind velvet ropes, but Sterling walked directly to the entrance where 2 security guards stood. One of them stepped forward, hand raised. "Back of the line, man." Sterling pulled out his wallet and extracted $500 bills, pressing them into the guard's hand. "I'm going inside. Now." The guard looked at the money, then at Sterling's face, clearly calculating whether this was worth the trouble. Finally, he stepped aside. "Enjoy your evening, sir." Inside, the club was exactly what Sterling had expected. Dim lighting punctuated by colored strobes, music loud enough to make conversation difficult, bodies pressed together on the dance floor in various states of intoxication. He moved through the crowd with single-minded purpose, his eyes scanning for her. And then he saw her. Willow stood behind the bar, her gray uniform replaced by black jeans and a fitted black tank top. Her hair pulled into a high ponytail. She was pouring drinks with practiced efficiency, laughing at something a customer said, her smile bright and genuine in a way he'd never seen at the mansion. She looked comfortable here, natural, alive. He watched her for 20 minutes from a corner table, watched men lean across the bar to talk to her, watched her deflect their attention with ease, watched her move through her work with a confidence that made his chest ache. This was her second life, the one she'd kept hidden from him, and seeing it felt like a violation and a revelation all at once. When Willow finally glanced up and her eyes met his across the crowded room, he saw the exact moment recognition hit. Her smile vanished. Her entire body went rigid. And even from this distance, Sterling could read the fury written across her face. Good, he thought. Let her be angry. At least then she'd know he wasn't going anywhere. Sterling ordered a whiskey he didn't drink and watched Willow work for the next hour and a half. Every interaction grated against his nerves like sandpaper. A man in his mid-20s leaned across the bar, saying something that made her laugh. Actually laugh, her head tilting back in a way that exposed the elegant line of her throat. Another guy, this one in an expensive suit that screamed finance sector, slid a business card across the counter along with what looked like an excessive tip. Willow pocketed both with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But it was the third man that made Sterling's hand tighten around his glass hard enough that he was surprised it didn't shatter. This one was different. Older, maybe early 40s, with the kind of casual confidence that came from wealth and power. He didn't lean over the bar like the others. He simply stood there, waiting, until Willow finished with another customer and came to him. Sterling watched her body language change, watched her smile become more guarded, watched her shake her head at something the man said. But the man persisted, pulling out his phone and showing her something on the screen. Willow's expression flickered, something between interest and wariness, before she shook her head again more firmly. The man shrugged, left cash on the bar, and walked away. Sterling was on his feet before he'd consciously decided to move. He made his way to the bar, positioning himself directly in Willow's line of sight. She saw him coming and her jaw set in that stubborn line he was beginning to recognize. "We're closed," she said loudly over the music, not bothering with pleasantries. "You still have an hour before last call." "Not to you." She turned away to serve another customer, deliberately ignoring him. Sterling waited, patient in a way that felt foreign to his nature, until she had no choice but to acknowledge him again. When she finally turned back, her eyes were cold. "What do you want, Mr. Kane?" "To talk. I'm working. You're going to take a break." "I don't take breaks." Sterling leaned forward, close enough that she could hear him without him having to shout. "Either you take a break, and we talk in private, or I make a scene right here in front of your customers and your manager. Your choice." For a moment, he thought she might call his bluff. Then she looked past him toward the back of the club where a balding man in his 50s was watching their interaction with obvious concern. Her manager, Sterling guessed. Willow's hands curled into fists on the bar top. 5 minutes, she bit out. "That's all you get." She said something to the bartender working beside her, a young woman with purple hair who shot Sterling a curious glance, then came around the bar and walked toward a door marked "Staff Only." Sterling followed. The corridor behind the door was narrow and dimly lit, lined with boxes of liquor and supplies. The music was muffled here, reduced to a dull thud that pulsed through the walls. Willow spun to face him the moment the door closed, her fury finally unleashed. "How dare you show up here? How dare you follow me like I'm some kind of criminal? I came to see where you're working. You came to check up on me like I'm a child who can't be trusted." She stepped closer, her voice rising. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? Having my employer track me down at my second job? If you had told me about it..." "I don't have to tell you anything." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "My life outside your house is mine, Sterling. Mine. Not yours to monitor or control or..." "That man," Sterling interrupted, his voice hard. "The one who showed you something on his phone. What did he want?" Willow's mouth fell open in disbelief. "Are you serious right now? You followed me here because you're jealous?" "I'm not jealous. I'm concerned about..." "You're jealous," she repeated, almost laughing except there was no humor in it. "You saw me talking to customers and you couldn't stand it, so you came down here like some kind of possessive." She stopped herself, shaking her head. "I can't believe this." "What did he offer you?" Sterling demanded, unable to let it go. "Because whatever it was, I can..." "Stop," she cut him off sharply. "Just stop. You don't get to do this. You don't get to swoop in with your money and your control and fix things that aren't broken." But what Willow didn't know was that man wasn't a customer. He was a threat. And Sterling was about to discover just how dangerous. "Then tell me why," he said, his voice dropping to something raw, more honest than he'd intended. "Tell me why you need this job so badly that you're willing to work yourself to exhaustion. Tell me why you won't let me help." Willow stared at him for a long moment, and he saw something shift in her expression, the anger giving way to exhaustion and something deeper, something that looked like old pain. "I have someone I'm responsible for," she said finally, her voice quiet now. "Leo, my younger brother. He's in college studying engineering and he's brilliant, Sterling. Absolutely brilliant. But our parents are gone and the money they left barely covered his first year. I'm paying for the rest. The confession hung between them, stripping away the layers of defiance she'd been using as armor. Sterling felt something crack in his chest. The salary I pay you covers rent, food, basics, she interrupted. This job covers Leo's tuition, his books, his housing. Without it, he'd have to drop out or drown in loans that would follow him for decades. She wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture of self-protection. So no, I won't quit. And no, I won't take your money, because the moment I do, I become dependent on you. And I've been down that road before. Sterling went very still. What do you mean? Willow hesitated. And he could see the internal battle playing across her face, the weighing of how much to reveal. 3 years ago, she said slowly, I was with someone. Someone who said he wanted to take care of me. Someone who paid for everything, controlled everything, decided where I could go and who I could see. He said it was because he loved me. Her voice hardened. It took me 2 years to realize it wasn't love. It was ownership. And by the time I finally got away from him, I'd lost everything. My friends, my independence, my sense of self. She looked up at Sterling, and he saw the fear beneath the fury, the trauma that had shaped her invisibility. So when you show up here, when you try to pay me to quit, when you demand to know where I am and who I'm with, all I can see is him. All I can feel is that cage closing around me again. The words hit Sterling like a physical blow. He'd thought he was protecting her. He'd thought he was being reasonable. But standing here in this narrow corridor, seeing the pain in her eyes, he realized he'd been doing exactly what her ex had done, just with better intentions. Willow, he said quietly, I'm not him. Aren't you? She asked, and the question cut deeper than any accusation. Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly the same. The music pulsed through the walls, filling the silence between them. Sterling wanted to argue, wanted to explain how this was different, how he was different. But the truth was more complicated than that. The truth was that he wanted control over her movements because he couldn't stand the thought of her being vulnerable. The truth was that his protection felt dangerously close to possession. And standing here, seeing what that need had cost her before, he finally understood why she kept making herself invisible. I should get back to work, Willow said, breaking the silence. Her voice was tired now, drained of its earlier fury. My 5 minutes are up. She moved past him toward the door, but Sterling caught her wrist gently. She froze but didn't pull away. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. For following you here, for not listening, for making you feel like you're back in that cage. Willow looked down at where his hand circled her wrist, then up at his face. For a moment, he thought she might accept the apology. But then she carefully pulled free and said, Sorry doesn't change anything, Mr. Kane. You still think you have the right to control my life, eh? And I can't live like that again. I won't. She pushed through the door and disappeared back into the noise and lights of the club, leaving Sterling alone in the corridor with the weight of his own mistakes and the terrifying realization that he was losing her before he'd ever really had her at all. What Sterling didn't know was that Willow's past wasn't the only danger she faced. The present was closing in. While Sterling obsessed over controlling Willow, someone else was watching her too. And what he was about to discover would change everything. Sterling left the club 20 minutes later, but he didn't go home. Instead, he sat in the back of the SUV parked across the street and made a call to Marcus. I need you to pull security footage from Echo nightclub for the past 3 months. Every camera angle they have. Inside and out. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Sir, that's going to require either a warrant or significant monetary persuasion. I don't care which. Get it done by morning. He ended the call and stared out the window at the club's entrance, watching people stumble out in various states of intoxication. Willow was still inside, still working, still living this second life he'd known nothing about. The conversation in the corridor played on repeat in his mind. Her ex. The cage. The way she'd looked at him like he was no different from the man who'd broken her. Marcus delivered the footage at 7 a.m., arriving at Sterling's home office with 3 external hard drives and a knowing look that said he'd asked no questions but had plenty. Club manager was cooperative once the price was right. Every camera, every shift Willow Reed worked over the past 3 months. Good work. Sterling took the drives and dismissed him with a nod. He knew he should sleep. He'd been awake for over 24 hours and his body was running on caffeine and adrenaline. But sleep felt impossible with Willow's words still echoing in his head, with the image of her behind that bar surrounded by men who looked at her like she was available, like she was theirs for the price of a drink and a smile. He started with the most recent footage, from last night. Watching himself arrive at the club felt surreal, seeing his own possessive behavior from an outside perspective. He fast-forwarded through their confrontation in the corridor, not needing to relive that particular failure, and focused instead on the bar area, on Willow. He watched her work with systematic attention, tracking every customer interaction, every conversation. Most were harmless, drunk college kids, finance bros trying to impress her with expensive tips. A few women who seemed to know her, regulars maybe, who chatted easily while she poured their drinks. Nothing concerning. Nothing that justified the jealousy that had driven him to the club in the first place. Then he saw him. The man appeared in frame at 10:43 p.m., positioning himself at the far end of the bar where the lighting was dimmer. He didn't order a drink. He didn't try to get Willow's attention. He simply stood there, watching. Sterling felt ice slide down his spine. He rewound the footage and watched again, this time paying attention to details. The man was in his early 30s. Wearing dark clothes that helped him blend into the shadows. His posture was too alert, too focused. This wasn't someone out for a casual drink. This was surveillance. Professional surveillance. Sterling zoomed in on the man's face, committing every feature to memory, then took a screenshot and sent it to Marcus with a single word. Identify. The response came back in less than 5 minutes. Jax Bishop, former military, currently employed by the Castellano family, known associate of Vincent Castellano's personal security detail. Sterling's blood turned cold. The Castellanos, the same family he'd been negotiating with 2 nights ago, the same family that had been pushing for a merger of operations that Sterling had been reluctant to accept. The same family that had a reputation for gathering leverage on potential business partners before closing deals. He opened the footage from previous nights, searching for Jax Bishop's face in the crowds. Found him 3 days ago, same position at the end of the bar, same watchful stillness. A week before that. 2 weeks. The pattern was clear and damning. Jax wasn't there by coincidence. He was tracking Willow, learning her schedule, her routines, her vulnerabilities. And Sterling had been so consumed with his own jealous obsession that he'd missed a genuine threat operating right under his nose. He pulled up footage from a month ago, before he'd even known Willow had a second job, and felt his stomach drop. There, Jax Bishop, standing in the same spot, watching Willow with the same calculated attention. This had been going on for weeks, possibly months, long before Sterling had started paying attention. The office door opened and Marcus entered without knocking, his expression grim. You found him in the footage. It wasn't a question. Multiple nights over the past month, Sterling confirmed, his voice tight. He's been watching her. Why? Marcus moved to stand beside the desk, looking at the frozen image of Jax Bishop on the screen. The Castellanos are thorough. If they're considering a partnership with you, they'd want insurance, leverage. Something to ensure you stay cooperative. Willow. Makes sense. She lives in your house, works for you. If they think she matters to you, then she becomes valuable to them. The implication hung heavy in the air. Sterling had spent the past 2 days making it abundantly clear to anyone watching that Willow mattered. Following her, confronting her, showing up at her workplace like a jealous lover. He'd painted a target on her back without even realizing it. "There's more," Marcus said, pulling out his phone. "I did some digging after you sent me his photo. Jax Bishop isn't just surveillance. He's extraction." Meaning? Meaning when the Castellanos want someone grabbed quietly, he's the one they call. He specializes in making people disappear without witnesses. Sterling felt rage unlike anything he'd experienced before. White-hot and utterly focused. Not the petty jealousy that had driven him to the club. This was something colder, more dangerous. Protective instinct mixed with tactical calculation. "How long do we have?" "Hard to say. Could be days, could be weeks. Depends on when Vincent decides to make his move." Marcus paused. "Sir?" "With respect, Miss Reed doesn't know she's being watched. She doesn't know she's in danger." Sterling was already reaching for his phone. "Where is she now?" "Still at the mansion. She got home around 4 a.m. and went straight to her room." "Good. She stays there." He pulled up his security chief's number. "I want every entrance monitored. No one gets in or out without my explicit approval. And I want a team on the East Wing, rotating shifts, 24/7 coverage." "You're going to lock her in?" Marcus asked carefully. "I'm going to keep her alive," Sterling corrected, his voice hard. "Even if she hates me for it." He looked back at the frozen image of Jax Bishop on the screen, at the cold calculation in the man's eyes as he watched Willow work, unaware that she was being hunted. Sterling had spent 2 days trying to control Willow out of possessiveness, out of jealousy, out of irrational need. Now he was going to have to control her survival. And this time, the cage he was building wasn't about ownership. It was about keeping her alive long enough to figure out how to eliminate the threat before Vincent Castellano made his move. The irony wasn't lost on him. Willow had accused him of being like her ex, of treating her like property to be controlled and contained. Now he was about to prove her right in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. But the alternative, letting her walk around unprotected while a professional extraction specialist tracked her movements, wasn't an option he could live with. Sterling picked up his phone and dialed her number. She didn't answer. He wasn't surprised. He sent a text instead. "We need to talk. Now. It's important." The response came back almost immediately. "No. Whatever it is, the answer is no." He typed back, "This isn't about us. You're in danger." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, what kind of danger? Sterling looked at the image of Jax Bishop on his screen, at the professional stillness of a predator watching prey, and typed the truth. The kind that gets people killed. But the danger was worse than Sterling knew. Because Willow wasn't just being watched. She was connected to something that happened 5 years ago. Something that would make her a target for life. Willow stood in the center of what Sterling called the secure wing, a section of the mansion she'd cleaned 100 times, but never imagined she'd be living in. The suite was 3 times the size of her staff quarters, decorated in shades of gray and cream with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the grounds. Beautiful and suffocating in equal measure. A cage dressed up as luxury. Sterling had shown her the footage 2 hours ago, his laptop screen displaying frame after frame of a man she'd never noticed watching her work. Jax Bishop. The name meant nothing to her, but the look on Sterling's face when he'd explained who the Castellanos were had told her everything she needed to know. These weren't business rivals. These were dangerous people. People who made other people disappear. "How long?" she'd asked, her voice surprisingly steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. At least a month? Possibly longer. And you didn't think to tell me sooner? I didn't know sooner. His jaw had been tight, his control barely holding. If I had known, if I'd suspected for even a second that someone was watching you. He'd stopped himself, but she'd heard what he didn't say. That he would have locked her down immediately. That her freedom had always been conditional, dependent on whether he deemed her safe enough to have it. So now she was here, in this gilded prison, with armed guards rotating shifts outside her door, and Sterling's right-hand man Wesley Shaw stationed permanently in the hallway. She'd met Wesley twice before, a man in his late 30s with military bearing and eyes that missed nothing. He'd been polite when Sterling introduced him as her primary security detail. But his presence was a constant reminder that she was no longer trusted to move freely through even her own temporary home. Willow moved to the window, looking out at the manicured gardens she used to walk through on her breaks. The afternoon sun made everything look peaceful, ordinary, belying the danger Sterling insisted was circling closer. She wanted to believe he was overreacting, that this was just another form of his possessive control dressed up as protection. But she'd seen the footage. She'd seen the cold, methodical way Jax Bishop had watched her. And she knew predators when she saw them. She'd run from one before. The door opened without warning, and Sterling entered, Wesley's voice carrying in from the hallway before the door closed again. "You can't just walk in here," Willow said, not turning from the window. "This is supposed to be my space. We need to talk." There was something different in his voice. Not the commanding tone he usually used, but something heavier, almost reluctant. She turned to face him. He looked exhausted, still wearing the same shirt from this morning, sleeves rolled up, tie long gone. "About what? About how I'm a prisoner in your house now? About how you were right, and I was wrong to think I could have any kind of life outside these walls? About why the Castellanos are watching you, specifically?" The words made her stomach drop. "What do you mean, specifically?" Sterling moved to the desk and set down a manila folder she hadn't noticed him carrying. "Marcus found something. A file from 5 years ago, from my father's operations before I took over." He opened the folder, revealing what looked like surveillance photos and typed reports. "Your name is in it." Willow felt the room tilt slightly. "That's impossible. I didn't even know who you were 5 years ago. But you knew my father. Or rather, you were in the wrong place at the wrong time." He pulled out a photograph and handed it to her. It showed a younger version of herself, maybe 21 or 22, standing outside a warehouse in what looked like the industrial district. She was wearing a waitress uniform, talking to someone outside the frame. She didn't remember the moment, didn't remember the warehouse, didn't remember anything about that day. "I don't understand." "This warehouse was one of my father's fronts. He used it for meetings with other families, for storage. For operations he didn't want connected to the main business." Sterling's voice was carefully neutral. "According to the file, you were working at a diner 2 blocks away. You came to deliver a catering order." The memory surfaced slowly, reluctantly. A last-minute order for sandwiches and coffee. Her manager sending her because the usual delivery driver had called in sick. She'd thought it was strange, being asked to deliver to a warehouse, but she'd needed the job too badly to ask questions. "I delivered food," she said, her voice distant. "That was it. I dropped off the order and left." "According to the surveillance notes, you arrived early. The meeting hadn't finished yet. You waited outside for someone to answer the door." Sterling paused. "How long did you wait?" "I don't know. 10 minutes? 15? What does it matter?" "It matters because during those 15 minutes, 2 men came out of the warehouse. They were arguing, loud enough that anyone standing outside would have heard them." Willow tried to remember, tried to pull details from a day 5 years gone, but came up empty. I don't remember hearing anything. One of those men was Vincent Castellano's brother, Marco. The other was my father. Sterling's voice had gone flat. 3 days later, Marco Castellano was found dead in the river, officially ruled a suicide. Everyone in the business knew it wasn't. The implications crashed over her like a wave. You think I heard something? You think that's why they're watching me now? I think my father made a note in his files that there was a witness present during his last conversation with Marco Castellano. I think when Vincent started investigating his brother's death years later, he eventually found those files. And I think he's been waiting for the right moment to determine what you know and whether you're a threat. Willow's legs felt weak. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her mind racing. But I don't know anything. I didn't hear anything. I was just trying to make rent. It doesn't matter what you actually know, Sterling said quietly. It matters what Vincent thinks you might know. And to him, you're a loose end that needs to be tied up. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. Willow looked at the folder on the desk, at the evidence of a life she'd thought she'd left behind. Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning, when you first found the file? Sterling met her gaze and she saw something shift in his expression. Guilt, maybe. Or regret. I wanted to verify it first. I wanted to be sure before you what? Her voice rose. Before you told me that your family is the reason I'm being hunted? That I'm in danger because your father decided to document every person who was anywhere near his crimes? Willow? No. She stood, anger burning through the fear. You don't get to willow me. You brought me into this house. You gave me a job. And the entire time you knew, or you should have known, that your father's files might have my name in them. That working for you might put a target on my back. I didn't know, Sterling said, his voice hard. The files were sealed after my father died. I'm still going through them. Still trying to understand the full extent of what he was involved in. But you suspected something. That's why you've been so controlling, so obsessed with knowing where I am and who I'm with. It wasn't just jealousy. You knew I might be connected to something dangerous. The accusation hung between them. Sterling didn't deny it, which was answer enough. Outside the door, Willow heard voices. Wesley's low rumble and someone else responding. Then Wesley's voice, clearer now. The file should have been destroyed years ago. Having her name documented was sloppy. Now we're scrambling to contain a mess that should never have existed. The other voice, younger, replied, The boss knows. He's known since she started working here. Why else would he have hired her? Willow felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Sterling and saw the truth written in his expression before he could hide it. You knew, she whispered. When you hired me, you knew I was in that file. Sterling closed his eyes briefly. I needed to keep you close. To protect you. You needed to control me, she corrected, her voice shaking. This entire time you've been manipulating me. The job, the rules, all of it. You weren't protecting me. You were managing a threat to your family's legacy. That's not true, isn't it? She moved toward the door, but Sterling stepped into her path. Get out of my way. Willow, listen to me. I said get out of my way. Her voice cracked and she hated the sound of it, hated the tears threatening to spill over. You're exactly what I was afraid of, exactly what I spent 3 years running from. Someone who thinks they have the right to control my entire life, who lies and manipulates and calls it protection. Sterling's face was carved from stone. I'm trying to keep you alive. You're trying to keep me contained, she shot back. There's a difference, and I'm done. I'm done with this house, with this job, with you. She tried to push past him, but he caught her arms, his grip firm. You can't leave. Not while the Castellanos are watching. "Watch me," she said, and meant it. Even if it killed her, she wasn't staying in this cage. Not anymore. What neither of them knew was that the threat wasn't just outside the mansion. It was already inside. Sterling's phone buzzed at 2 a.m. with a message from Marcus that made his blood run cold. Found him. Grant Foster. Security tech. Low level. Been feeding information to an outside contact for 6 weeks. Willow's schedules included. Sterling was out of bed and dressed in less than 3 minutes. His mind already calculating the damage. 6 weeks. That meant Grant had been reporting Willow's movements since before Sterling had even known about her second job. Someone had been tracking her routine with inside help, building a profile, waiting for the right moment to act. And Sterling had been too focused on his own possessive obsession to see the threat operating inside his own house. He found Marcus in the security office, surrounded by monitors displaying feeds from every camera on the property. Grant Foster sat in a chair in the corner, wrists zip-tied behind his back, a purple bruise already forming on his left cheek. He was young, maybe 25, with the kind of soft features that made him forgettable. Perfect for a mole. "Show me," Sterling said without preamble. Marcus pulled up a series of emails on his laptop. He's been using an encrypted account, but the encryption was amateur level. Took me an hour to crack it. He scrolled through the messages. Reports on Willow's schedule. Which days she worked at the club. What time she typically returned to the mansion. Which routes she took. Even details about her relationship with Sterling. The confrontations. The growing tension. Everything Vincent Castellano would need to know to decide when and how to make his move. "Who's the contact?" Sterling asked, his voice deadly calm. "Routed through 3 proxy servers. But I traced it back to an IP address registered to a shell company the Castellanos use for their quieter operations." Marcus closed the laptop. He's been reporting directly to Vincent's people. Sterling turned to Grant, who had been silent until now, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Look at me." Grant's head snapped up, fear written plainly across his face. "Mr. Kane, I can explain. You have 30 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't put a bullet in your head right now." The threat was delivered without heat, which made it all the more terrifying. Grant's words tumbled out in a rush. "They threatened my sister. Said they'd hurt her if I didn't cooperate. I didn't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice," Sterling said coldly. "You chose to betray the people who employed you. You chose to put an innocent woman's life at risk. Those were choices." "I didn't know they were going to hurt anyone. They just said they wanted information. Said it was for insurance." "Insurance," Sterling repeated, the word tasting like poison. "You helped them track a woman who's done nothing wrong, who was in the wrong place at the wrong time 5 years ago, and you thought that was just insurance?" Grant's face crumpled. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please. My sister is being moved to a safe house as we speak." Marcus interrupted. "I sent a team an hour ago. She's fine. And she'll stay fine as long as you tell us everything you know." Sterling listened as Grant spilled details about his contact protocol. The dead drops where he'd left written reports when email felt too risky. The timeline of what information he'd passed along. It was thorough and damning and confirmed Sterling's worst fear. The Castellanos knew everything. They knew Willow's routine down to the minute. They knew she mattered to Sterling, which made her valuable as leverage. They knew she was connected to Marco Castellano's death, which made her dangerous as a potential witness. And they'd been watching, waiting, building their case for 6 weeks while Sterling had been too blind to see it. When Grant finished, Sterling nodded to Marcus. "Get him out of my sight. Hold him until we're done with the Castellanos, then decide what to do with him." As Marcus hauled Grant to his feet and let him out, Sterling pulled out his phone and called Wesley. "Bring Willow to my office, now." "Sir, it's 2 a.m. She's asleep." "I don't care. Wake her up. This can't wait. 10 minutes later, Willow appeared in the doorway of his office, Wesley standing guard behind her. She was wearing pajama pants and an oversized sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, her face still creased from sleep. But her eyes were alert and angry, the same anger that had been burning since she'd discovered the file. "What now?" she demanded. "Another revelation about how you've been manipulating my life?" Sterling gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit." "I'd rather stand." "Sit," he repeated, his voice harder. "Because what I'm about to tell you is going to make you wish you'd never taken that delivery job 5 years ago." She sat, but her posture remained rigid, defensive. Sterling opened the file folder and pulled out a specific photograph, one he hadn't shown her before. "You said you didn't remember hearing anything when you were at the warehouse, that you just waited outside for someone to answer the door." "I didn't. Look at this photo." He slid it across the desk. It showed her younger self standing outside the warehouse, but this angle captured something the first photo hadn't. The door was slightly ajar. Not wide open, but enough that someone standing close could hear voices from inside. Willow stared at the photo, her face pale. "I don't remember the door being open." "My father's notes say otherwise. He specifically documented that the delivery person, you, was standing within earshot when he and Marco Castellano had their final argument. He noted that you looked uncomfortable, that you kept checking your watch, that you heard something. But I don't remember." "Because you weren't paying attention," Sterling interrupted. "You were thinking about getting back to the diner, about making your next delivery, about whatever else was going on in your life. You weren't listening to them, but you heard them. And somewhere in your memory, those words exist." Willow shook her head. "Even if that's true, even if I did hear something, I can't remember it now. It was 5 years ago. How could that possibly matter?" "It matters because my father wrote down what was said during that argument. And what he wrote is damning enough that Vincent Castellano has spent years trying to find anyone who might corroborate it." Sterling pulled out another document, this one a transcript in his father's precise handwriting. "Marco Castellano accused my father of stealing from a joint operation they were running. My father didn't deny it. Instead, he told Marco that if he complained to Vincent, the proof of Marco's own embezzlement would surface. Proof that would get Marco killed by his own brother." The words hung heavy in the office. Willow's eyes widened as the implications sank in. "So when Marco ended up dead, Vincent blamed my father. Assumed it was murder disguised as suicide. But he never had proof. Until he found my father's files and realized there was a witness. Someone who could confirm that his brother was threatened the same day he died." Sterling leaned forward. "You're not just a loose end, Willow. You're the only person who can verify what really happened that day. And to Vincent, that makes you either an asset to be acquired or a threat to be eliminated." Willow stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "This is insane. I can't verify anything. I don't remember their conversation." "Vincent doesn't know that. And even if he did, he'd want to make sure you could never remember. That you could never be hypnotized. Never be questioned by authorities. Never become a problem." She wrapped her arms around herself, that gesture of self-protection Sterling had seen in the club corridor. "So what am I supposed to do? Spend the rest of my life locked in this mansion because your father decided to document everything and the Castellanos want to clean up their family history?" "No," Sterling said quietly. "You're supposed to let me protect you until I can eliminate the threat permanently." "Eliminate?" Her voice was sharp. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm going to end this, one way or another." He met her gaze, letting her see the cold calculation there. "But I need you to stay here. Stay safe. And trust that I know what I'm doing." Willow laughed, a bitter sound. "Trust you? After everything you've lied about?" "I never lied. I just didn't tell you everything." "That's the same thing." "No." Sterling said, standing now, moving around the desk toward her. A lie would have been telling you that you weren't in danger. A lie would have been letting you walk around unprotected while the Castellanos built their case. I kept information from you to keep you alive, Willow. There's a difference. She looked up at him, and for the first time since the file revelation, he saw something other than anger in her eyes. Fear, yes, but also exhaustion. The weight of being hunted by forces she'd never known existed. I just wanted to take care of my brother, she whispered. I just wanted to survive. How did my life become this? Sterling felt something crack in his chest. The urge to pull her into his arms, to promise her everything would be fine, was overwhelming. But he'd made enough promises he couldn't keep. So instead, he said the only truth that mattered. Because evil men don't care about innocent intentions. They only care about what you know and what you're worth. And to them, you're worth enough to die for. The words settled over them like a shroud. Wesley cleared his throat from the doorway, breaking the moment. Sir, we have movement on the east perimeter. 2 vehicles, no identification. Sterling's entire body went rigid. Lock it down. Full protocol. No one gets in or out. He looked at Willow, saw the fear spike in her eyes. Stay with Wesley. Do exactly what he tells you. Do you understand? She nodded, mute with terror. As Wesley ushered her out of the office, Sterling pulled his gun from the desk drawer and checked the magazine. If the Castellanos were making their move now, he'd be ready. And this time, he wouldn't hesitate to do whatever it took to keep her safe. The vehicles turned out to be a false alarm, just a catering company making a late delivery to the neighbor's estate 2 properties over. But the adrenaline didn't fade. Sterling spent the rest of the night coordinating with his security team, running through contingency plans, preparing for the attack he knew was coming. It was nearly dawn when he finally returned to check on Willow. He found her sitting on the floor of the secure wing's living room, her back against the wall, knees drawn to her chest. She wasn't crying, but her eyes had that hollow look of someone who'd gone past fear into numb acceptance. Wesley stood by the door, his presence a silent reminder of the cage they'd built around her. You should try to sleep, Sterling said quietly, dismissing Wesley with a nod. The door closed, leaving them alone. I can't, Willow said, her voice flat. Every time I close my eyes, I see that photo. Me standing there, not knowing I was hearing something that would follow me for 5 years. Not knowing I was signing my own death warrant just by doing my job. Sterling moved to sit beside her on the floor, keeping a careful distance between them. You didn't sign anything. You were innocent. You still are. Innocence doesn't seem to matter much in your world. No, he admitted. It doesn't. They sat in silence for a moment, the early morning light beginning to filter through the windows. Finally, Willow spoke again, her voice softer now, almost distant. I told you about my ex, about how he controlled everything. I remember. What I didn't tell you was why I stayed for so long, why it took me 2 years to finally leave. Sterling waited, not pushing, letting her find her own words. His name was David Chen. I met him when I was 23, working at a restaurant downtown. He was older, successful, charming. He made me feel special, like I was the only person in the room when he looked at me. Her laugh was bitter. Classic, right? The powerful man who sweeps the naive girl off her feet. It started small. He didn't like me working late shifts because the neighborhood was dangerous. So he'd pick me up after work, drive me home. Then he didn't like my coworkers, said they were a bad influence. So he convinced me to quit and work at a place closer to his apartment. Then he didn't like that I had my own apartment, said it was a waste of money when I could just stay with him. She wrapped her arms tighter around her knees. Every time he had a reason. Every time it sounded like he was looking out for me. And every time I gave up a little more of myself until there was nothing left. Sterling felt rage building in his chest, not at her, but at the man who'd systematically dismantled her autonomy. What made you finally leave? Leo, she said simply. He was 17, still in high school, and David said he was taking up too much of my time and money. Said if I really loved David, I'd tell Leo to figure out his own life. That's when I realized that loving someone shouldn't mean abandoning everyone else. That protection shouldn't feel like suffocation. She turned to look at Sterling, her eyes meeting his. So I left. I packed a bag while David was at work, took Leo with me, and disappeared. We moved 3 times in 6 months because David kept finding us, kept showing up, saying he just wanted to talk, that he could explain, that things would be different. Did they? No. They never are with men like him. She paused. Men like him think they own you. That caring about you gives them the right to control every aspect of your life and the really dangerous part is that they genuinely believe they're helping. They believe their control is love. Sterling heard the accusation beneath her words, heard her drawing the parallel between her ex and him. I'm not him, he said quietly. You keep saying that, but from where I'm sitting, I can't see the difference. You both wanted to control where I went, who I saw, what I did. You both used protection as justification. You both made me feel like I was suffocating. There's one critical difference, Sterling said, his voice rough. I don't want to own you, Willow. I want to keep you alive. And when this is over, when the threat is eliminated, I will let you walk away. I will let you go back to your life, your job, your independence. Because you're right. You deserve to be more than invisible. You deserve to be seen. To be free. To make your own choices. He turned to face her fully. But right now, in this moment, those choices could get you killed. And I can't allow that. Not because you belong to me, but because your life has value beyond what you can offer anyone else. You are not just a witness. You are not just my maid. You are not just anything. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Willow's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Then what am I to you? It was the question Sterling had been avoiding since the night he'd seen her in the black dress. The question that had driven every possessive impulse, every controlling decision, every moment of jealousy and fear. You're the person who made me realize that I've been living in the dark for years, just like you, he said finally. You're the person who showed me that invisibility isn't safety. It's just another form of prison. And you're the person I would burn down everything I've built to protect. Before Willow could respond, the door burst open. Wesley stood there, his face grim. Sir, we have a problem. Grant Foster's gone. Sterling was on his feet instantly. What do you mean, gone? Someone cut his restraints and let him out through the service entrance. Security footage shows him leaving with an unidentified male approximately 20 minutes ago. Ice flooded Sterling's veins. He's going to tell them everything. The layout of the house, where Willow is, our security protocols. Already working on it, sir. I've got teams tracking his phone and car. We'll find him. But Sterling knew it was too late. Grant had already given the Castellanos what they needed. The element of surprise was gone. The siege was coming. He turned to Willow, who had gone pale. We need to move you, now. This location is compromised. Where? Safe house on the other side of the city. Marcus is already there setting up security. Sterling pulled out his phone, dialing orders to his team. Wesley, get her ready to move. 5 minutes. As Wesley moved to help Willow gather essentials, Sterling's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The text made his blood freeze. We have Leo Brooks. Exchange him for the girl by midnight, or we send him back in pieces. Below the text was a photo of Leo, Willow's younger brother, bound to a chair in what looked like a warehouse, a bruise darkening his left eye. And that's when Sterling realized the Castellanos weren't coming for Willow. They already had the one thing that would make her surrender. Sterling looked up to find Willow staring at his phone screen, having read the message over his shoulder. The color had drained completely from her face. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no. They can't have Leo. He's not part of this." "They know he matters to you," Sterling said, his mind already calculating possibilities, strategies, ways to turn this around. "They're using him as leverage." Willow's voice went hard, determined, the fear transforming into something fiercer. "Then give them what they want. Trade me for him." "Absolutely not. He's innocent. He's just a kid trying to get through college. This isn't his fight." "And it's not yours either," Sterling shot back. "I'm not letting them take you." "You don't have a choice," Willow said, moving toward the door. "If they hurt Leo because you decided I was more important, I'll never forgive you. I'll never forgive myself." Sterling caught her arm, stopping her. "If I give you to them, they'll kill you both. That's how this works. They'll extract whatever they think you know, then eliminate you and your brother to tie up loose ends. Trading you isn't saving him. It's sentencing you both to death." The truth of it settled over her, and he watched her crumble slightly, the fierce determination giving way to helpless despair. "Then what do we do?" Sterling pulled her close, letting her lean against him for just a moment, feeling her heartbeat racing against his chest. "We do what I do best," he said quietly. "We go to war. And we win." The exchange location was the same warehouse where it all began. The Castellanos had a sick sense of poetry. The exchange location was the same warehouse where Willow had delivered sandwiches 5 years ago. Sterling recognized it from the surveillance photos in his father's file. The Castellanos had a sick sense of poetry. Marcus had argued against Sterling going personally, had insisted on sending a tactical team instead. But Sterling knew Vincent Castellano well enough to understand that anything less than a personal appearance would result in Leo's immediate execution. This required the illusion of cooperation, right up until the moment it didn't. They arrived at 11:45, 15 minutes before the deadline. Sterling drove while Willow sat rigid in the passenger seat. Her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Wesley and 3 other security personnel followed in a second vehicle, staying back far enough to avoid detection but close enough to respond if needed. "When we get inside," Sterling said, his voice low and controlled, "stay behind me. No matter what happens, no matter what they say, you stay behind me. Understand?" Willow nodded, not trusting her voice. They'd gone over the plan a dozen times. Sterling would negotiate. He'd offer money, territory, whatever it took to secure Leo's release. And if negotiation failed, Wesley's team would breach from the rear entrance while Sterling created a distraction. It was risky, maybe suicidal, but it was all they had. The warehouse door was ajar when they arrived, just like it had been 5 years ago. Sterling felt the weight of his gun pressing against his spine, concealed beneath his jacket. He'd brought 2 extra magazines and a knife strapped to his ankle. If this went badly, he'd need everything. Inside, the warehouse was exactly as cold and cavernous as Sterling had imagined. Dim industrial lights hung from the ceiling, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Shipping containers lined the walls, creating a maze of hiding spots and kill zones. And in the center of the space, tied to a metal chair with duct tape over his mouth, was Leo Brooks. He looked younger than his 20 years, his face bruised and swollen, his college hoodie torn at the shoulder. When he saw Willow, his eyes went wide with panic and he started struggling against his restraints, trying to warn her, trying to tell her to run. "Don't," Sterling murmured, catching Willow's arm before she could rush forward. "It's a trap." As if on cue, Jax Bishop emerged from behind one of the containers. a gun held casually at his side. He was exactly as he'd appeared in the surveillance footage, professional and cold, with the kind of calm that came from years of violence. "Mr. Kane," Jack said, his voice carrying easily in the empty space. "Punctual. I appreciate that in a man." "Where's Vincent?" Sterling demanded, his eyes scanning the shadows for additional threats. He counted at least 3 other shapes moving in the darkness, probably more. "He's watching remotely, doesn't like to get his hands dirty with cleanup operations." Jax's smile was thin and humorless. "I'm authorized to negotiate on his behalf." "Then let's negotiate." "Name your price." "Already told you the price. The girl in exchange for the boy. Simple transaction." Sterling felt Willow tense beside him. "Not happening. I'll offer you $5 million cash, wired to any account you specify, plus guaranteed immunity from retaliation. You take the money, release the boy, and we all walk away clean." Jax tilted his head, considering. "Tempting. But Mr. Castellano isn't interested in your money. He's interested in loose ends, and your maid here represents a very problematic loose end. She doesn't remember anything from that day. She was just a delivery driver who happened to be in the wrong place." "Maybe," Jax conceded. "Or maybe she remembers everything and you've been coaching her on what to say. Either way, Vincent wants to ask her himself, face to face. Under conditions where honesty is strongly encouraged." The implication was clear. Torture. They'd torture her until they were satisfied she knew nothing, then kill her anyway. Sterling took a step forward, positioning himself more firmly between Jax and Willow. "I'm offering you a fortune to walk away. That's more than Vincent is paying you for this job. Take it and disappear. Start over somewhere else." "Can't do that," Jax said, raising his gun until it pointed directly at Sterling's chest. "I have a reputation to maintain. People who hire me expect results, not excuses about better offers." The other shapes in the shadows moved closer, revealing themselves. 4 men, all armed, all positioned to create a crossfire that would cut down Sterling and Willow before they could reach cover. Wesley's team was still minutes away from breaching position. They were alone. Sterling made a calculation in that instant, one that would change everything. Sterling made a calculation in that instant, weighing odds and outcomes, measuring the value of his life against hers. The math was simple. Without him, Willow had a chance. Wesley would get her out. Marcus would protect her. She could disappear, change her name, start over somewhere Vincent Castellano would never find her. With him dead, she became less valuable as leverage. Just another witness who could be handled through other means or forgotten entirely. But if Jax took her now, she'd die screaming in some basement while they pulled apart her memories looking for something that didn't exist. "New offer," Sterling said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Take me instead." Willow's breath caught audibly. "Sterling, no. I'm the one Vincent really wants," he continued, speaking over her protest. "I inherited my father's empire, his files, his secrets. I know everything Marco Castellano said that day because my father documented it. I know about the embezzlement, the threats, everything. Trade the girl and her brother for me. That's the deal." Jax's expression shifted, showing interest for the first time. "Vincent would definitely prefer to have you in custody." "Then it's settled. Release them both and I'll come quietly." Sterling turned to Willow, seeing the tears streaming down her face, seeing her shake her head in silent denial. "Wesley will take care of you. He has instructions for what to do next. You'll be safe." "I'm not leaving you," Willow said, her voice breaking. "I'm not letting you do this. You don't have a choice." He reached out, cupping her face with both hands, memorizing every detail in case this was the last time he saw her. "I need you to understand something. From the moment I saw you in that black dress, you were never invisible to me. Never. You've been the only thing I could see." Before she could respond, he kissed her. It was desperate and fierce and tasted like goodbye. Willow kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his jacket, pulling him closer even as she tried to push him away. When they finally broke apart, Sterling whispered against her lips, "You are not just my maid. You never were." Then he shoved her backward, hard enough that she stumbled, and threw himself forward toward Jack's Bishop. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Jax's gun fired, but Sterling was already moving, closing the distance between them too fast for a clean shot. The bullet grazed his shoulder, hot and sharp, but he didn't slow. He crashed into Jax with his full weight, driving them both to the ground. The other gunmen opened fire, but their angles were wrong. Too much risk of hitting their own man. Sterling felt rather than saw Willow scrambling toward Leo, heard her ripping at the duct tape binding him. Good. If she could get Leo free, they could run while Sterling kept Jax and his men occupied. He landed a solid punch to Jax's jaw, felt bone connect with bone, felt the satisfying crunch of impact. Jax returned the favor, his fist driving into Sterling's ribs hard enough to crack something. They grappled on the concrete floor, both fighting for control of Jax's gun. Sterling heard the rear entrance explode inward, heard Wesley's team shouting commands and laying down covering fire. The warehouse filled with the deafening sound of automatic weapons, with the acrid smell of gunpowder, with the screams of wounded men. He felt Jax's grip on the gun weakening and wrenched it free, bringing the weapon up and pressing it against the other man's temple. "Call them off," Sterling snarled, blood running down his face from a cut above his eye. "Call your men off now, or I paint this floor with your brains." Jax's smile was red with blood from his split lip. "Vincent will just send more. You can't protect her forever. Watch me." Sterling pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the warehouse, final and absolute. Jax Bishop went limp beneath him, his eyes staring at nothing. Sterling pushed himself up, his entire body screaming in protest, and turned to find Willow. She was standing 20 feet away with Leo, both of them safe behind the cover of Wesley's team. Her eyes were wide with shock, with relief, with something that looked dangerously close to love. Sterling walked toward her, his gait unsteady, blood soaking through his shirt from the shoulder wound. When he reached her, she threw herself into his arms, sobbing against his chest. "You're an idiot," she said, her voice muffled. "A complete idiot." "I know," he replied, holding her tighter. "But I'm your idiot now, if you'll have me." The hospital kept Sterling for 3 days, but the news Marcus brought would change everything. The hospital kept Sterling for 3 days. The bullet wound required surgery, 2 cracked ribs needed monitoring, and the concussion from hitting the concrete floor made the doctors nervous about internal bleeding. Willow barely left his bedside, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair next to his bed, ignoring Marcus's suggestions that she go home and rest. Leo had been treated for his injuries and released after one night, with Wesley assigned as his personal security detail, until they were certain the Castellano threat was fully neutralized. On the 4th day, Marcus arrived with news that changed everything. "Vincent Castellano is dead," Marcus announced, closing the door behind him for privacy. Sterling, who'd been picking at the hospital breakfast Willow had forced him to eat, looked up sharply. "When?" "2 nights ago. Heart attack, according to the official report. But my contacts say it was more likely poisoning." His own people turned on him after Jax Bishop's death. Apparently, losing his best operative in a failed extraction made Vincent look weak. His second-in-command decided it was time for new leadership. "And the new leadership's position on Willow?" Sterling asked, though he already knew. If they'd wanted her dead, she'd be dead by now. "The new regime wants peace, They've agreed to forget the entire Marco Castellano situation in exchange for you staying out of their territory. Clean slate for both sides. Marcus pulled out a folder. I took the liberty of having documents drawn up. Partnership dissolution, territory transfers, everything you'd need to walk away from the business entirely if that's what you want. Sterling took the folder but didn't open it. Instead, he looked at Willow, who sat curled in the chair with her legs tucked under her, watching him with those eyes that had gone from invisible to unavoidable. What do you want? She asked quietly. That's not the right question, Sterling replied. The question is, what do you want? You've spent years making yourself small, making yourself invisible, living your life around other people's needs and dangers. So I'm asking you, Willow, if you could go anywhere, do anything, what would you choose? She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the blanket on his hospital bed. I want to wake up in the morning without checking over my shoulder. I want to go to the grocery store without wondering if someone's following me. I want to help Leo finish college without working myself to exhaustion. I want to be boring and ordinary and safe. She looked up, meeting his gaze. And I want to do all of that with you, if that's even possible. Sterling felt something in his chest that had been tight for days finally loosen. It's possible. He looked at Marcus. Draw up the dissolution papers, all of them. I want out of every operation, every partnership, every agreement. Sell the mansion, liquidate the assets, set up clean accounts. I'm done. Marcus nodded slowly, unsurprised. And what will you do instead? We'll figure it out, Sterling said, reaching for Willow's hand. Together. 3 months later, Sterling Kane, former mob boss, ceased to exist. The paperwork took 3 months to finalize. Sterling's exit from the criminal empire his father had built required delicate negotiations, substantial payoffs, and the cooperation of a dozen different factions who all wanted their piece of his territory. But by the end of summer, it was done. Sterling Kane, former Mafia boss, ceased to exist. In his place was Sterling Kane, private citizen, with a modest fortune in legitimate investments and no ties to his former life. They chose a small coastal town in Oregon, the kind of place where people asked questions but didn't pry too deeply into answers. Sterling bought a building on the main street, a brick structure with large windows and good bones that needed work. They spent the fall renovating it together, stripping old wallpaper, refinishing floors, arguing over paint colors with the easy comfort of people who'd survived worse than disagreements about whether the walls should be cream or eggshell. Leo visited on weekends when he could spare time from his engineering program at a university 2 hours away. Wesley had stayed on, not as security, but as a friend, helping with the renovation and occasionally joining them for dinner. Marcus had disappeared entirely into retirement, sending only occasional postcards from locations around the world. The bookstore and cafe opened in November, just as the rainy season started in earnest. It was Willow's idea, combining her love of reading with Sterling's unexpected talent for making coffee. They'd argued about the name for weeks before settling on Second Chapter, a reference to new beginnings that felt appropriate for both of them. The grand opening was small, just a handful of locals curious about the new business and the couple running it. Willow wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair down around her shoulders, her smile genuine as she helped customers find books and recommended her favorite titles. Sterling worked behind the coffee counter, learning to perfect latte art and engage in the kind of meaningless small talk that comprised normal life. It was strange and wonderful, and nothing like the world he'd left behind. 1 year to the day after the warehouse, Willow woke up in their apartment above the bookstore to find Sterling already awake, watching her with that intensity that had softened over the months but never quite disappeared. "What?" she asked, her voice still rough with sleep. "Just looking," he replied. "You know, really seeing you." Something I should have done from the beginning. She smiled and moved closer, tucking herself against his chest. You see me now. That's what matters. Through the window, she could see the ocean in the distance, gray and endless under the overcast sky. The town was quiet at this hour, peaceful in a way that still felt miraculous after everything they'd survived. No one was watching. No one was hunting. No one was trying to control or contain or eliminate her. She was simply Willow, co-owner of a bookstore, sister to a brilliant engineering student, partner to a man who'd burned down his entire world to keep her safe. Do you miss it? She asked, because the question had been hovering between them for months, unspoken, but present. The power, the control, all of it? Sterling was quiet for a moment, considering. Sometimes I miss the certainty, knowing exactly who I was and what I was supposed to do. But then I come downstairs and watch you recommend books to customers with that enthusiasm you get when you find the perfect story for someone. Or I see you laugh at something ridiculous Leo texts you. Or I wake up next to you without wondering if today's the day someone tries to take you from me. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. No, I don't miss it. This is better. Even though you're making coffee for tourists instead of negotiating with crime families? Especially because of that. He pulled back slightly to look at her face. You know what the best part is? You're not invisible anymore. Not to anyone. And definitely not to yourself. Willow felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears. Relief and gratitude and something that felt dangerously close to complete happiness. I spent so long trying to disappear, trying to make myself so small that no one would notice me, no one would want to control me, no one would hurt me. And now? Now I think maybe being seen isn't so terrifying. Not when the person seeing me actually wants me to be free. Sterling kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, sunlight was starting to filter through the clouds, painting the room in shades of gold. Somewhere below, the first customer of the day was probably waiting at the door, ready for coffee and books and the ordinary magic of a quiet life. Come on, Willow said, climbing out of bed and pulling on one of Sterling's old shirts. We have a store to open. Sterling watched her move around the room, no longer trying to be invisible, no longer hiding the person she'd always been beneath layers of self-protection and fear. She was radiant in her ordinariness, beautiful in her freedom, entirely and completely herself. He'd given up an empire for this, and it was the best trade he'd ever made. They went downstairs together, hand in hand, and opened the door to second chapter. The bell above the entrance chimed softly as their first customer entered, bringing with them the smell of rain and the promise of another ordinary, extraordinary day. Willow smiled, genuinely smiled, as she greeted them. And Sterling stood behind the counter, making coffee, and watching the woman he loved finally live the life she'd always deserved. No more invisibility, no more cages. Just two people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk into the light together. The beginning of a story that was entirely their own. If you enjoy stories like this, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. That's how I'll know you truly liked it. Even if you're watching on your TV, grab a second to join this family of fans who love emotional and heartfelt stories. Your support means everything, and it helps us bring you even more tales like this.